Test. Test. Test.
Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So one of the things we're going to try to do today is a live VR demonstration of some of our attacks. Now, live demo is always tricky, so we might have to fall back to a pre-recorded demo, but we're going to try to show you guys some of the things we've been working on. So without further ado, Gonzalo, my co-author, will take it away and discuss our research.
Yeah, so this presentation is divided into two parts. The first part is about the attacks that we discovered in virtual reality applications. And the second part is more about the defenses that we designed against these attacks in a framework that we call MetaGuard, that stands for Metaverse Guard. And the speakers for today, as you may know, is my friend Vivek Nair from UC Berkeley and myself from TU Munich. May continue to the next slide, Vivek. We would like to acknowledge the NSF, the National Physical Science Consortium, the Hertz Foundation, and Berkeley Center for Responsible Decentralized Intelligence for supporting our work. Okay, so our research is closely linked to the metaverse, and probably during this Metaverse Safety Week, you have heard different definitions of what the metaverse is. If you talk with social media companies, they probably tell you that the metaverse is about connecting in new ways in virtual environments. If you talk with companies that are more into business, they might say that the metaverse is about collaborating with coworkers in virtual worlds. And whatever it might be, the truth is that the metaverse is not yet here, but they have a common denominator, which is the use of virtual reality. So our research is going to focus on looking into VR devices and see how much privacy they leak and how we can defend against these leaks. Could you go? Yeah, thank you. The reason why we went into study privacy in metaverse applications is because we are afraid that the privacy issues that we have today in the internet will transfer to the metaverse as well. And knowing that companies are losing a lot of money on selling VR devices at a loss in the hopes of recouping these losses through secondary revenue channels might indicate that, of course, data will also be valuable in the metaverse and it might be misused. So that is why we looked into how much privacy are we going to expose in metaverse applications. Okay, so we have to first look at the metaverse from an adversarial perspective. This is common practice in info security. And we identified 4 types of attackers. We have from left to right, the hardware attacker, which controls the firmware and manufacture the VR device. And it has access to the raw sensor data itself. Then moving on, we have the application that is running locally at the client. And this attacker has access to the API that the VR devices provide, and therefore it also has access to the raw sensor data and other information that the VR device generates. Now, if you are playing a multiplayer game, then there will be a server that is ingesting or receiving this information from your application. Therefore, it has access to this data as well. And then it will relay this information to other users so that they themselves can render the avatars of everybody in the VR game. So the users that are playing the game will also have access to your telemetry and other information. And not only this last attacker is able to interact with perhaps the victim and could perform even social engineering attacks, right? And 2 things to note here is that from left to right, the data fidelity will degrade as data is being processed, like for example, compression. And also 2 attackers can become one and become therefore a stronger attacker as well. Okay, so with this framework is the lenses through which we look at privacy in virtual reality. Okay, so with this framework, we conducted our metadata study that stands for metaverse data. And what we did was to design a game that is based in an escape room where players will have to find out the password of one room to move to the next room. And there were a series of rooms that we designed with puzzles and other things they had to do to prompt the user to do certain things that might reveal certain information. And it was just 2 of us. So you could imagine that bigger groups of developers could design games that hide artifacts to reveal information more easily than we did. So we had 30 participants play our escape room game, and after they gave us their consent, we collected the data of their playthrough. And then after all our participants played, then we analyzed this data that they produced in virtual reality. And we analyzed the data and we tried to see if we were able to figure out their ground truth. The closer we got to the ground truth, the more successful the attack was. And this was in essence what we did. Basically analyze data and see if we were right in the analysis. So this was what constituted the metadata study. So now Vivek will try to do a VR demo, and I will discuss the different things that we were doing in this game. So hopefully it works out, and otherwise we will go through the slides. So he's gonna go into the metaverse now. You are muted, but okay. All right, so he's in there already. You can see the first room. This is just an introductory room where it says hello. The password is hello. For example, it's just to get the user to understand the mechanics of the game. So Vivek is donning the VR headset, the controllers, and we will move on to the next room. So the first rooms that we designed was just to get a hang of it. So face was the password of this room. Velvet was the password of the next one. And now we enter into the rooms that you had to interact more with. So this room had different letters on different screens that they spell out church, which was the password of the room. And again, these rooms in the beginning were just to get habituate the user to virtual reality and the mechanics of the game. So this is the first room where we are actually extracting useful information. So if you're familiar with colorblind tests, these screens have these palettes, and if you are colorblind, you are potentially not able to read them. If you're going quickly through this room and you're not colorblind, you might not notice this, and otherwise you would not be able to solve this puzzle, releasing one data point. If you move on to the next rooms. Okay, this room is again part of what we also assessed, which was the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Test. I don't know if you are aware of this one, where it's a test to discern whether or not a person has dementia. So throughout these rooms, you didn't notice, but there were passwords, and these passwords you had to remember. And then this room, in order to pass this room, you had to recall these passwords, and then you would say the word that is highlighted in yellow. So we were also measuring your cognitive ability here. This room is also fun. We prompted the user to do different shapes with their body so that they would reveal the wingspan. You see the third figure, which is extending its arms. And in that moment, our algorithm would capture how long the distance between your arms, and therefore you can fingerprint. You have a biometric that you can fingerprint. Of course, height is an obvious one. If it's just in short the maximum Y coordinate of the VR headset, and therefore you have like 2 fingerprints already. You have the wingspan, you have height, and we also, as I mentioned before, we already collected color blindness, and we already collected the cognitive assessment that you through those puzzles. This one is about physical fitness. Of course, Vivek is not going to do this, but going up and down, how deep you can go in your squat will determine how fit you are, and one had to go up and down to reveal the different squares. Okay, we can move on. All right, this was just a cipher. This is a filling room. Then we had this, if I recall correctly, was reaction time. Sorry, it's very laggy when you are like presenting and at the same time using this. The computers, they might lag a little bit. Okay, this was for reaction time. So we actually got another biometric where you had to press a button to, as soon as something changed its color. Okay, this one is a very interesting one. The password of this room is Apple, and you see the word Apple in different languages. So when you say Apple looking at, for example, POM, then you could infer that the person speaks French. It's not exact, but again, this is part of the inference that we do. So it's more behavioral rather than observational. This was another filler room. This one is interesting. So imagine an attacker presents user different objects that are moving, and depending on the pattern that the user recognizes, you can actually tell what is the frame rate of their device, because different devices have different frame rates depending on how expensive they are. This is part of the cognitive assessment test. This is also part of the cognitive assessment test. Likewise here, I think, yeah, again, the cognitive assessment test makes you redo these memory tests again and again. These are more of the same assessments. Yes, and these we are coming to the end. These are more obvious, like eye tests, for example, that could be hidden in other ways. And this is for long-sightedness, and this is for short-sightedness. And this was the last part of the room. If they were able to read this, then you could tell how well they could see. And then this was at the end. They finished the game, so they could see all the rooms that there were, and then you can see like let's say this was the end scene basically. So you could see that it was kind of clunky. Of course, it was just two developers doing this, and we just wanted to prove a point. And the fact that some of these attacks, you might see that they are very blunt. Perhaps a bigger group of researchers was not able to, would be able to hide these artifacts to extract more information better than us. Nonetheless, this was just the tip of the iceberg. We were collecting in the background other information. So you can see the example here of height, for example, and the wingspan that we already saw. You can move to the next slide, Vivek, if you may be so kind. This was the reaction time that we saw, and also the frame rate. This was the eyesight test that we had as well. And this is the one that I mentioned about Apple, which is basically where you are looking at. This is another. We didn't have an eye tracking device in our VR setup because commonly they don't use it, so we want to be as general as possible. But there will be more attacks that you can actually carry out in the metaverse depending on where the person is looking. So, for example, you could see it in advertisement where if someone is looking at a Coke instead of a Pepsi, then the person is the person will be more interested in Coke, so you could advertise more heavily into that product. And then you can even think about more pervasive things to do, like religion, politics, etc., just of where they are looking. So that is very, very pervasive as well. This is the experiment setup. So we had a large play area. We had 4 fidelity motion sensors, and then we also had tracking sensors, and we also have 3 cameras, the proper lighting, a microphone, and then we had an observational area. We were like helping the user, the participant, and so on and so forth. There are other attacks that were not that were happening in the background, as I said. Some of them were maybe kind of obvious to you in hindsight, but there were other things that were happening in the background. So, for example, we could actually tell at a state level where were you with multilateration. You could ping different servers, and then you can measure the latency, and based on that, you can triangulate where the person is. So these attacks also apply to virtual reality, not to only mobile phones or other applications. Also, you didn't see this, but we were keeping track of the coordinates of your headset. So we actually were tracking how you moved in your room. And if you just take the maximum and min coordinates, you actually can tell how big the room is. And this is another fingerprint that you can put attached to the user. So finally, we actually collected more than 25 attributes. These are the most important ones. You can see that we were able to extract height with high accuracy, with 100% accuracy within 7 centimeters. Also, we were able to tell which arm was longer, their interpupillary distance, so what is the distance between their their pupils, their wingspan also with high accuracy, 86% within 7 centimeters. Their room size had also high accuracy, their geolocation. We also got different VR device specifications, even their handedness based on observations of what hands they used, their eyesight, whether they were colorblind, the language they spoke, their physical fitness, their reaction time, and how whether or not they had dementia, right? So through the gameplay that you just saw, you might have noticed that perhaps there were maybe a few data points that you could gather, but if you look really closely, there are very, very many. And one of the important things to consider here is that for every new attribute that you have, there's a new chance for an attacker to fingerprint you, right? So out of the 30 people that we had with just 2 attributes, height and wingspan, you were able to uniquely identify that person within the 30. So of course, if you're going to have more players, like 500 or thousands, then you will need more attributes. But the fact that we were able to gather this information with high accuracy, and there are so many, that you are able to, you could potentially be able to identify these people amongst large clusters. For example, there is a study that has some decades that says that you could actually identify any person in the world with 30 attributes based on their demographics. It is true that our demographics, this study doesn't, all of them are not demographics. Nonetheless, there are unique attributes that you could attach to everybody, and in combination, you could identify people potentially across the world. Now, these attributes were, can you go back to the previous one? Sorry, thank you. So these attributes were important. Nonetheless, they are more pervasive ones that you can actually gather from these primary attributes. So we actually infer gender, age, and ethnicity with with 100% accuracy. Surprisingly, age within 1 year. And this is just based on the attributes that we previously gathered. So you could input into a machine learning model their voice, right? And that will tell you very high, with high accuracy what the gender is. For age, we use primarily how well they could see, their height, and their physical fitness. And that could tell you age very well, and ethnicity based on accent. So there are things that are on the background that might not be intuitive. Like you wouldn't have told that from the demo that Vivek did, and nonetheless, you can actually gather this. Now, these studies have had a lot of, have received a lot of attention from Forbes and the Register, indicating that the public is really interested in this, and that everybody thinks that this is a crucial problem that we have to focus on. And feel free to go through these articles because they are fun to read and they explain our research very briefly. So I'm done with my part of the talk. Now Vivek will continue with how to defend against these attacks. Thank you.
Thanks, Gonzalo. Hopefully everyone can still.
We see you and see the screen and hear you as well.
Okay, good. Yeah, hopefully the audio is all right.
Yes.
So yeah, so just to summarize, right? So the point of our first study that Gonzalo has summarized well here is not exactly about these particular attributes, right? This is neither a totally exhaustive list of attributes that you can observe in VR, nor is it particularly interesting on its own, right? So a question you might have, for example, is why do I care if someone can observe my height in VR, right? They can do that in real life anyways. And the point, as Gonzalo highlighted, is not just that these attributes are available to parties in VR, to applications, to servers, even to other users, but the fact that they can make inferences based on them. So the fact that not only can they hear your voice and measure your height and wingspan, but also that when you input those things into a machine learning model, you can accurately get your gender and other attributes, demographics as well, and in fact, de-anonymize you. So that's one of the main findings, is that you have so many attributes that you can accurately make these inferences about users. And the second main thing I wanted to highlight for a second is just how much power an adversary has once they can construct these environments in an adversarial way. So not just passively observing users like previous studies have done, but actually manipulating the VR environment in a way that seems like a fairly reasonable escape room style game, with these puzzle-like elements that users are motivated to solve. But actually in the background are revealing information. So once you can construct the environment in a targeted way, you can get users to reveal a lot more information without necessarily knowing that they're revealing information about themselves. So those are our two key takeaways from this first part, that VR can be manipulated, gamified to steal more information, and that those attributes that you steal can be used to make inferences about your demographics and indeed your identity. And so, we don't highlight these just to have a negative viewpoint on VR. In fact, we're big proponents of VR. I am a nearly daily user of VR myself. And the point is that, unlike the platforms we're used to, like the internet, the web, where we have privacy tools, we have proxies, VPNs, we have incognito mode. We don't really have this in VR right now, right? So we don't have the tools as users to counteract these attacks on privacy if we're not comfortable with them. And so the second part of this talk is going to be attempting to solve that problem and present some countermeasures to the privacy risks that we just highlighted. And specifically, the way we do this is with a tool called differential privacy. Differential privacy is a statistical quantification of privacy. So it's a privacy framework that allows you to give a numeric measure through this parameter called epsilon, numeric quantification of how private data is. And it does this by essentially saying how hard is it for an adversary to differentiate a data set with or without a particular data point, right? And so this epsilon parameter lets us give a rigorous approach to counteracting these attacks by, when we present countermeasures in this section, we can actually measure their accuracy in rigorous statistical terms. So the two specific differentially private tools that we use to counteract these attacks are the bounded Laplace mechanism, which we use for continuous attributes, and the randomized response mechanism, which we use for binary or Boolean attributes. So things like handedness, where it's left or right, and so 1 or 0. We use a randomized response, which is based on coin flipping. For everything else, where you have a continuum of values, the bounded Laplace mechanism, which is based on a Laplacian noise distribution, has this nice property of guaranteeing minimum error for a minimum mean squared error for any given privacy value. So our approach in this section is going to be to use these functions on various data attributes to protect your privacy in VR. In other words, to limit, in particular, the ability of adversaries to make inferences based on your data. And we want to do this in a way that maximizes privacy, but minimizes your impact on your user experience. And so the mechanisms we chose and the framework of differential privacy has this nice property of being provably optimal in this trade-off, giving you the most privacy you can get mathematically for a given amount of usability impact. And so that's sort of how we frame our defenses as being statistically optimal with these two mechanisms. And so when we implement these, we have a picture here of me standing in a metaverse environment using our implementation, differentially private incognito mode implementation that we call MetaGuard. The reason we call it incognito mode, to draw a similarity to something that people are already used to in web browsers, private browsing mode. And the goal of this MetaGuard plugin, which we've released now as a Unity plugin, it can be added to any existing metaverse application with a fairly limited number of exceptions, with the fundamental goal being to prevent you from being tracked across sessions. So one of the biggest problems, as I mentioned, with having all this data that adversaries can gather about you without your knowledge in VR is that they can uniquely identify you, right? It's very unlikely for these 25 to 30 attributes that any other user has that exact combination of attributes, right? And therefore, even if you think you're anonymous, someone can watch you for a while, gather this data, and pinpoint exactly who you are, right? And incognito mode on a browser has the goal of making that impossible, making it harder to track you from one session to another. And our VR incognito mode has the same goal, making it harder to pinpoint exactly what your identity is by making it harder to get these attributes that are then used to fingerprint you.
I have a question about that. So the incognito mode we're also quote unquote familiar with has been for like Google, for instance, for Chrome, was really like, oh, you can't tell if it's like you, if it's me or my husband on that computer, as opposed to you can't tell if it's me or someone down the street, right? Like it wasn't really incognito. It wasn't really privacy. And in fact, like there have been lawsuits and Google's lost and all of this, right? So I just want to better understand to what degree you're preventing tracking. Is it that you can't, is it that the organization, because you still have IP address and other things, right? Like that can link it to to my home. So to what degree are, can you disambiguate those two concepts of like not being identified at all versus maybe we know it's coming from your home. We just don't know if it's you, your son, your brother, or who's actually doing the actions.
Sure. That's a great question. I appreciate the question. So I'll say two things. So first of all, incognito mode, calling this incognito mode, while it's useful framework for people to understand what the concept is, kind of undersells what MetaGuard is doing, right? Because incognito mode in a browser, in a browser, it's actually not really messing with the contents of your requests. It's changing the headers of your requests, like removing cookies from your requests. So the metadata in a browser is affected by incognito mode. The actual contents are not affected. Whereas in VR, this MetaGuard, this incognito mode, is actually modifying the data itself, right? The contents of your request to a server to make the data less identifiable. So that's one major difference.
Yeah.
However, the network level stuff like your IP address, that is considered sort of tangential to this. So the thing is that in the defenses on data and on requests in browsers and in VR is very different, right? You need very different techniques to protect the data privacy in VR. But once you get to the network level, the same tools can be used. So when you think about things like VPNs to hide your IP address, VPNs should still be perfectly acceptable method of hiding your IP address in the metaverse compared to in browsers. So the network level stuff, you can use the same tools like VPNs and proxies. And then we cover the scope of this research is everything that is unique to VR, everything where the same tools of the web wouldn't necessarily apply. So hopefully that clarifies. We have another question, Jordan.
Yeah, I was just curious whether or not you had looked at or considered for this kind of a, incognito style approach to using avatar characteristics. So in a different forum, we talked with somebody about the idea of driving an avatar where you artificially influence like the responsiveness and kind of how it attempts to mimic the actual actions of the person in VR, so that what is appeared and recorded from the avatar doesn't necessarily match the individual. This kind of gets at, as you were talking before, about exactly where in that chain of information you're intercepting and looking at it, but as a way of kind of altering those characteristics that would be being able to be tracked about you.
Yeah, that's precisely what we're doing. So I'll continue here, and if your question is still not answered, feel free to ask it again. But yeah, to jump ahead a bit, that's a good way to describe a lot of what the defenses are here. But just to look at the usability standpoint for a second, because this is an important aspect of any privacy research, is that are users who are not privacy experts going to be able to use this tool effectively, right? And so This at a high level, it's one click, right? This master toggle switch is all you need to do to enable MetaGuard and the defenses, right? So with one click, you can turn on this incognito mode in the metaverse and get these corresponding defenses. And I'll talk in a second about what these defenses are actually doing. But if you're a user who wants to dive in deeper, you can also choose which actual attributes about yourself you want to hide and which attributes you're okay revealing, right? And the reason you might be okay revealing some is for application-specific usability. For example, if you're playing a game in VR like Beat Saber, where you need to use your hands very precisely to touch objects or to interact with objects, then you may want to turn off this wingspan and arm length defenses so that your hand precision is maintained, but you might not care as much about your height or squat depth being exactly accurate. So if you have some application-specific needs, it was important to us that you can tweak which attributes this MetaGuard is affecting according to your needs. And then lastly, I mentioned earlier that we have this privacy parameter epsilon when we're using differential privacy. And we actually have a slider here where users can change that value depending, again, on their needs. So in an application like VR chat, where you're not necessarily doing any very precision type of work, you're just talking to people, interacting, then you could put this slider all the way up to high privacy, and that would maximize your anonymity, maximize your attribute values. You would lose some precision by doing that, right? If you're doing something like, on the opposite side of the spectrum, competitive gaming, where you don't need to have total privacy, you just want to not be exactly identified, then you could move this to the low side, where you get almost unnoticeable impact on your usability. And so, we have tried to strike the right balance here of making it very easy for users to go incognito, to get additional privacy with the click of one switch, but also dive in and tune their experience to their needs if they wish to do so. All right, so how do these, yeah.
I was just going to, as someone who sits on like 7 or 8 advisory boards bringing privacy tech to market, I really encourage you to change from incognito mode to something else, or you will be relegated to what people think Google incognito mode is. And I think what you have is far more protective and powerful. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that. Continue.
Well, this is more like actual armor, like putting something on.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is actually protective.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad that incognito mode, if anything, undersells other than oversells. We're trying to get a concept that users understand, but we'll definitely, if this moves forward into a sort of a device level feature, then the branding is something that we can think about. Sort of, in the interface itself, we just call it MetaGuard on or MetaGuard off, right? So this is our sort of user-facing interface. And so MetaGuard is the name we've used so far, but certainly branding, once this moves forward, if the technology is of interest, can be considered. So how do these actual defenses work? So we talked about the underlying statistical tool of differential privacy. So when you toggle on a defense, what's actually happening, the first thing that happens is your device takes a snapshot of your instantaneous ground truth attribute values. So for things like IPD, arm lengths, wingspan, the size of your room, your height, etc. Right? So you get an instantaneous one-frame snapshot of these values. And what happens after that is that you use this bounded Laplace mechanism to sample a noise distribution centered around your ground truth values, right? So this is why you need the attribute values, so that the offset, the protected attribute values, are as close as possible to your real values, minimizing the impact while still being within a differentially private distribution. Once we have calculated these values and the corresponding offsets, so the corresponding private values, our plugin goes into the virtual game world. It looks at these virtual objects. So for some context, and this may be repeat information for some of you, but the way a VR application typically works with something like Unity is you have the OpenVR or OpenXR API streaming telemetry data into the game engine, into the Unity game engine. And the game engine is inserting these virtual objects like the left hand, right hand, head, into the game world to mirror the positions of the telemetry data it's receiving from the OpenVR APIs, right? And so what our application does is it inserts these intermediate objects, these 4 offset objects, into the game hierarchy. And it sets up these coordinate transformations between the native VR objects and the coordinate origin. And so it's inserting these intermediate offsets and these transformations according to the offsets we calculated earlier. And all you need to know about this is the effect of these coordinates, which are simply position, like offsets, and scales. So changing the sort of location or scale of these coordinates of these objects. The result of this set of transformations is whatever set of switches you have flipped on as the user, the observable locations of those objects will now match the noisy, the private attribute values rather than the intrinsic or the ground truth attribute values. So that, the reason you need this set of transformations in this hierarchy is to make sure that any possible permutation of enabled defenses enforces exactly those private transformations and nothing else. And so specifically, we have 2 types of offsets. This is one of the tricky problems with doing privacy in VR, is that the simplest method of just shifting coordinates in order to anonymize certain data points on certain axes is actually problematic, right? Think about something like height, where, if I were to just add a fixed offset to my height, when I'm standing up, it would maybe be a valid method because you would see my height plus this offset. You wouldn't be able to observe my true height, right? But now if I need to go close to the floor for some reason where my height is 0, you'd still see this offset. And in fact, now you would know my real height after that, because you would be able to subtract that back from what you observed previously. And so this is why we use, scaling, in other words, warping the virtual world, warping the coordinate axes as one of our main techniques, so that the 0 point for these attributes is preserved. Another thing you can think about is wingspan, right? The distance between your controllers. So you want it to be private when your arms are extended, right? But you still want your arms to touch in the virtual world when you touch your real hands, right? So you can't just add something to the distance where you lose that 0 point. And so this is the reason for these dynamic or multiplicative offsetting approach, where all of your coordinates maintain their 0 point, and therefore you preserve those the user experience when they you preserve the way users expect the virtual game objects to behave in essence. And so the result of these transformations, is shown here. So when what we did, we took the data from the 30-person user study that Gonzalo had introduced, and we reran that. We replayed all of those recordings, all of those users' usage sessions, play sessions of the escape room. This time with Metaverse, with MetaGuard enabled in the virtual environment. Right, and then we reran all of the attacks on top of that with MetaGuard on and MetaGuard off, and also sort of at each of the supported privacy levels on the slider. And what we found is that even at the lowest level, with relatively imperceptible user experience degradation, you have a significant impact on the ability of adversaries to infer data attributes of a user. So if we look, for example, at things like height, which were 100% accurate within 7 centimeters without any defense enabled, right? Immediately you drop to less than 70% even at the lowest privacy level, and all the way down to less than 40% at the high privacy level. I won't go through all of these, but I'll just say that there's a significant reduction in the ability of adversaries to infer these attributes when you're using the extension. And yeah, we have a question. I'll get to it in 1 second. I'm just gonna finish the point here, which is that recall that these inferred attributes are based on adversaries collecting all of these data points and then running a model on top of them to make inferences about a user. So even though MetaGuard, the extension that we mentioned, doesn't do anything to directly protect your gender, for example, right? The fact that adversaries cannot infer things like your height and your wingspan as accurately as they could before means that they cannot use those data points to infer your gender as accurately. And so if we look at this bottom table here, we see that these inferred attributes also have a significant degradation in accuracy. Most importantly, if we look at identity, the ability to uniquely point out which individual you are in the metaverse based on your unique combination of attributes, which was 100% accuracy without MetaGuard enabled, right, is less than 6% of the time can you do this at the lowest privacy level of MetaGuard. And the point is that by degrading all of these attributes just a little bit, right, because you need to combine many different attributes to identify a VR user, when you degrade all of these a little bit, your ability to point out who you are exactly gets significantly degraded, gets significantly impacted. And so if you don't necessarily care about people knowing your height and wingspan, but you want to make sure that they can't point out exactly which individual you are with any degree of accuracy, then a very low privacy parameter, a very low amount of noise with the MetaGuard extension, putting that noise in the right attributes has a huge impact on the ability to identify a user. And so that's one of our most interesting results, is that you don't need much noise with MetaGuard to totally throw off the ability to de-anonymize individuals. All right, so I know we had at least one question. I'm happy to take any questions you may have in the next few minutes here. And the links to both of these papers are on screen as well.
Cool. So yeah, thanks very much. This is interesting and great to see kind of work put into this kind of an effort and recognition, not just of the problem and doomsaying about it, but hey, let's do something about it. So 2 things. One, could you put the links in the chat? That would be really handy.
Sure.
The question I had is so talking through what you were doing with the noise introduction, that kind of stuff, it reminded me very much of what we do in cryptography related to like cryptanalysis and measuring the effectiveness and strength of a given algorithm and that kind of stuff, and especially in terms of like hashing. I was curious if you guys did much measurement into how true the assumptions or those measurements of an ability to profile an individual last over time or a greater volume of interactions, and if you guys had done any work to measure, the confusion diffusion of the processes that you're applying to these data sets. Yeah,
okay, that's an excellent question. So we didn't. So in the base case, right, without any defenses, the only ability we had, right, is to view a 30-minute usage session of a user, right? So we didn't have data over many different sessions, right? In our initial study, we have a 1 play session. You can assume that the more data you have, right, the more accurate it's going to be. But the point is that within 20 minutes, you can actually get strikingly accurate view of a user's attributes, and so you may not need much more than that, right? You'll have diminishing returns. Now, with the MetaGuard plugin, with the privacy, right, your level of privacy doesn't diminish over time, so you don't get more than 1 view of the data. So the point is that, and this is not normally the case with differential privacy. Normally with differential privacy, you have this concept of a privacy budget that you're spending over time by providing more and more data to adversaries. And the important thing to note about our techniques here is that the offset, the noisy attribute values, are only calculated once during a session. So you give adversaries exactly one view of your data. You choose at the start of your usage session a profile of fake attribute values that you want to present. And then for the rest of that entire session, your avatar is transformed to constantly appear to be mimicking those fake attribute values. And then once you have another session, right now you are having a new set of values. But the point is that those sessions should be unlinkable if you can't identify the user. So an adversary—
You'd have to enrich them with other data in order to link them. Okay.
Yeah, an adversary shouldn't be able to aggregate data over many sessions because they won't be able to link the users. And so you shouldn't lose privacy across multiple sessions.
So this is so cool. I love the deployment. I'm like really excited about what you've created here. I just want to point out two things. One, because this is something that the whole world talks about privacy and messes it up a bit. And I just want to be clear that we don't, like, the state of being anonymous, like choosing to be anonymous, to me, not a privacy issue. That's an issue of, I don't want to be known. I don't want it known that I'm here so that I can listen furtively or so that I can say something and not have blowback. It's a free speech ability. Where privacy comes in is we don't want to be tracked. So if someone is inferring things about us based on our just showing up and it's wrong, or we just don't want to be tracked over time or at all, that's the privacy issue we're protecting against. So I just want to make sure we don't conflate the anonymity piece with the privacy piece, because they are separate things, and especially in Web3, it gets conflated. And then secondarily, here, oh God, I lost my thought, so I'm just gonna give the floor to somebody else, and if I get it back, I'll shout it out.
Yeah, I'll comment on your first point here, because it's really good that you brought this up, right? This is one of the main motivations for giving users the ability to select their privacy level, their privacy parameter, right? And the point is that if you just care about being anonymous, as our results show, even the lowest privacy level is sufficient for that, right? Whereas if you care about, and we use privacy level as a term of art to describe this parameter epsilon in differential privacy. Now, if you care about your actual attributes being inferred, then you can select a higher privacy level, and you can actually prevent people from observing height or wingspan and so on. And so, I want to emphasize that users have that option available. And that's why we didn't just decide, everyone is going to be at this level. So you have the option here, and there's a benefit of the approach of targeted noise to specific attributes.
Right, and I think the other, and I'd love to maybe unpack this in another call, just separately, but I'd love to better understand too the fact that you're doing it. Most differential privacy deployments are about a data set that an organization has that they want to safely reuse that data set for some purpose. But here, you're doing on behalf of the individual. And so I'm wondering, is that which is amazing, is that the reason that the privacy budget is not, it's easier to not have to respend it or lose it over time, because it's really a individual differential privacy safety mechanism as opposed to an entire data set.
So usually companies, they use differential privacy for aggregate statistics. So they run counts or averages, variance or whatever. Even they can run machine learning models. And it's called the central mode of differential privacy, where you first aggregate, you calculate the average, and then you add the noise to the result. Here we are using something different. It's called the local mode of differential privacy. And the key difference is that you add noise to the individual attributes separately. So then companies could also do this, like Google, for example, use Rapport, which is deprecated now. But like if you are using your phone, for example, your iPhone, it's sending which emojis you are mostly using. and they are using local differential privacy for that, for example. So it's a very convenient way to, when you don't, when the server is untrusted, you can use local differential privacy instead, and you add the noise locally. So in terms of the budget and all that you mentioned, you still have the same concerns, because you could share these emojis or log in a VR session with differential privacy done locally, and then tomorrow you do the same thing. So there is still, and this also links to what Jordan mentioned before about studying MetaGuard in long streams of data and sessions, and we should study how easy it is to re-identify someone despite having differential privacy in MetaGuard along like many sessions. And there's still the concept of privacy budget is still there. The difference is that you said that maybe companies struggle to come up with a privacy budget and they choose it themselves arbitrarily. Here we give the user the choice, right? And we say, well, you could use less or more privacy, and that makes it more easy. But you could also use if you are using other sources of local differential privacy, or even global differential privacy, I think you could still let users know, leave the users the choice to say how much privacy they would like to preserve. So I don't think it's exclusive of our work. It's also in others. And I don't know if this answers your question completely.
Hey, Deborah.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, in the interest of time, I would petition that we meet again if possible. We have a core team that gets all these things together and kind of synthesize them, how to adopt stuff in PSF framework. But before we close, I really want to give the floor to Luis, who's had his hand up, and potentially some questions, possible recommendations for us from any of the advisors. I'm available for next hour and happy to keep this kind of discussion open. If Vivek and Gonzalo, you're here, it would be really worthwhile to gather some immediate recommendations from our advisors, especially some of the ones that really hardly ever able, to show up, like because of time constraint. It's really great to have them here. So Luis, over to you, and then Oz.
Sure, thanks. So this is really great stuff, and I think it has extreme value. From the perspective of unintended consequences, I wanted to raise one issue, which is that I would imagine that metaverse platforms will use some of this data, like height and wingspan, to actually protect against adults trying to pretend to be kids. And I'm wondering if you can put limits on the offsets so that while you can mask people, you won't inadvertently allow adults to hide the fact that they're pretending to be a kid.
Yeah, you actually could do it, but then it's in exchange of privacy, right? So you could choose bounds for adults and choose bounds for kids, right? So then the kids would be indistinguishable between each other, and then adults would be indistinguishable between each other, but you could tell them apart, right? So I could clearly see it if society prefers, to protect against these types of attacks, then okay, let's calibrate the noise for kids and let's calibrate the noise for adults so you can tell them apart. So I think that is solvable.
So unfortunately, I need to get going, but I think Gonzalo, are you able to stick around? So yeah, Gonzalo can stay to answer any questions. If you want to contact me or Gonzalo, so our information is our emails are in the paper that we've shared with you right at the top, and feel free to follow up with any questions. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and Gonzalo can stick around.
Yeah, guys, I had one quick question. You guys have done a lot of assessment in terms of what's inbound. Are you looking at all of the data that's collected on the device and how that data is being interpolated? And then secondarily, what are you guys doing in terms of assessing the threat in terms of who the actors are that are trying to profile?
Okay. So we only extracted data from playthroughs, so we didn't go in detail into how much the VR device is actually collecting. That was out of the scope. We just wanted to see how much data you could produce from a playthrough. I can point you to a paper that contains like all the telemetry and all the data points that actually
if you could, I'm just Oz at XRSI.org. I'm working on a paper for the United States Army. And I'd like to include some of your findings and reference it. But the other side of this is that, you know, we're looking at, we had ISIS doing a ton of recruiting in Web 2, and they've got, I mean, ostensibly their social media department's over 1,200 people now. And as we go into the metaverse, you know, we saw with mods and video games that you get someone radicalized in about 2 weeks. The scarier part is that they can radicalize a lot faster inside of the metaverse. And so those are the things I'm looking for a couple more studies on, so that we can reference point. But this could be really interesting. I'd like to figure out how to collaborate with you guys.
Yeah, sure. I'm very happy. If you leave your contact information in the chat, I can store it, and then I can like send you our links, and also this other paper that it's like complementary to ours as well.
Perfect.
Great, thanks, Oz. I know Peter had recommended for you guys to be part of the eCrime conference. I highly recommend that you submit your paper there.
Is it archival or?
If you go to apwg.org, then you'll be able to find the eCrime conference information. I don't recall exactly where it's happening.
He put a link to it earlier in the chat. I'll repaste it down at the
bottom. I have it here on my screen already. Fishing trends. Okay, because we already submit. I mean, as in research, like we submit to academic conferences, and in particular, we are submitted to S&P Auckland and also to NDSS. So those are like the main ones that we are, because we have to get our PhDs, right? So,
right.
But so if this one is non-archival, meaning that they don't mind that it's published somewhere else, and for sure.
They don't mind actually. Perfect. The reason is to invite you to that conference is the last time I was invited, we had a kind of a closed sort of conversation with global computer emergency response teams. Now imagine 2018, and I'm trying to tell them that there is virtual reality cyber attacks that we got to prepare for, and people just roll their eyes. They're battling with like GDPR. Some of the conclusions that came out of it was like, hey, so if this happens, how are we going to get these global organizations to pay attention to do better? So there is the regulatory aspect that gets into play. Then there is the computer emergency response teams that need to know to attribute what are the kinds of crimes, like Interpol would be heavily interested in your research. So this conference attracts these global agencies, European Commission folks that are looking at cybercrime data, etc. Cassidy, like that's his deal. Like he brings in all these very, very technical, but all the way to regulatory folks that would be able to take your research, understand what needs to be synthesized at very global level, to implement regulations better. I mean, that's kind of our role as well, but I highly recommend that if you can be there, that would just enlighten a whole lot of people in the room.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take note for sure. We'll try.
You know, along those same lines, are there non-academic forums that you're considering bringing this to? I mean, we've got the Metaverse Safety Week, which would be a good place to talk about this kind of stuff in December, but there's also forums like Verara does regular kind of industry side, so it's more the folks that were using some of your technology to help prevent from doing maybe bad things, but it's a way to get in front of some of those audiences, especially when you talk about like one of the ways of making MetaGuard more effective is going to depend on at what layer within the stack and the operating system, the goggles and stuff you can embed it, right, or in the equipment. So those are the folks that you might need to get in front of to talk about that kind of stuff. Is that something you guys have talked about much or looked at?
I agree with you. Like the ideal scenario would be that the firmware deploys these techniques, right? Because the firmware would still be able to access the raw data, and then it's only that we are protecting in this paper against the server and other users, right? But the application running locally has access to the APIs provided by VR devices. The VR device has access to the raw sensor data, so the protection should be at the firmware level. Obviously, we are software engineers, so we don't know as much about hardware, but it would be super interesting to talk with the hardware folks so that they can implement our stuff there. So if you could kindly share with us like a list of these venues that it's interesting for us to join, then we will do our best to get in there.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
couple
Yeah,
places
I'll
there.
also-
Yeah.
So
Sorry,
we're each experts in different areas, right? Like, so I am not an XR, VR, AR, expert, but I have come from 17 years of deep privacy experience. So my expertise is I can tell you all the places for privacy conferences that would make sense if you want to reach that community right now.
Yeah.
A great example would be the rise of privacy tech, which is focused specifically on bringing privacy innovations to market and building a healthy ecosystem there with investors and advisors and buyers of the potential technology. But I mean, I could give you another list, or we can
That's great.
call.
Yeah, for sure.
I did want to. What was the question I was going to ask? Oh yeah, where are you in the bringing this to market aspect? Like, clearly, you've just announced it recently. Is it like, oh, you've got like 2 more years of your PhDs before you're gonna like actually make it like a company? Is it open source? Is it like you're gonna have a proprietary patented thing you bring to market? I guess I just want to know a little bit more about like the MetaGuard itself.
Yeah, so in terms of research, so yeah, clearly we just released this, so we haven't planned so far ahead. Specifically, I have less than a year on my PhD, so I'll have to move into either academia or industry. My friend Vivek still has like a couple of years of his PhD, so he will not finish anytime soon. As of now, it's completely open source. It has an MIT license, so everybody can use this. Nonetheless, we patented the attacks and the defenses prior to releasing this. And in terms of a company, I think it would be, I guess, a non-profit, because I don't know how we would make any money out of this. So and also it's not like our intent. We really want to bring privacy to the metaverse as quickly as possible and as better as possible. But yeah, I guess it's up to discuss. It's up to discussion.
Then it would be a matter of it being a standard that people.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah, exactly. So following up the answer would be to like, thanks for like sharing these venues where we can actually talk about our stuff, because then we could make it a standard, or like help to make a standard or something like that.
Are you
awesome.
Are you aware of the IEEE standards that are relevant to what you're doing?
Yeah, so there is IEEE person who contacted us, and he's taking a look at the paper. We don't know yet what his views are, so I hope we hear from him soon. But if you could also list the standards that could be relevant for us, it would be also interesting to have a look.
Yeah, so I've been a part of the standard that's P7008, which is about AI systems that nudge people's behavior. That one is shifting, but it's very, very, very closely related to another one called P7014. And that one's about emotion recognition and inferences made from those. So while emotion recognition is only part of the implications of what you're guarding against, I think that the group, which I haven't joined yet, but I get updates on it. I think the group would probably benefit a lot from just seeing what you're building and how you're thinking about the technical aspects of it pretty practically.
Yeah.
So Gonzalo, I copied some of the things into the chat here that we've been talking about, like VAR, dropped, and that kind of stuff. Michelle, I added DIITA in there. Do you want to add the other IEEE one if you've got it? That might be useful for them.
Yeah, I'm also part of DITA. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, dignity, inclusion, identity, trust, and agency, which is definitely related to what we're talking about here.
It's pretty broad, but they cover lots of really, really related cool stuff.
Yeah. So this one is 7014. And if you email me, then I can introduce you to the person that leads 7014. Okay, and then great. you can join, you and your teammate can join.
Awesome.
And I just included the Open Voice Network, which works on ethics and privacy and security around like voice assistant technology, which is a Linux Foundation. I think I just spelled Linux wrong, whatever, but it's a Linux Foundation open source project.
Oh, great.
And they have a basically advice and stuff that you're going to want your advice incorporated in there. So, but I could make an intro too, if it makes it
thank
easier.
you. Appreciate it.
So sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Deborah. Just funnily enough, all of these groups, so IEEE is looking to potentially sponsor Metaverse Safety Week, kind of like same thing, like Metaverse Standard Forum, they're going to be showcasing at the Metaverse Safety Week. So one of the things that is very highly likely to happen is all of these stakeholders are going to assemble around Metaverse Safety Week. We can potentially showcase this work, potentially at a Human Rights Day or at a Privacy and Governance Day, whichever one seems appropriate, but we can coordinate a potential, sort of intervention like. Today, what we saw is very like research focused, etc. But this could really nudge them to be more like, hey, this is the not just the technical aspect, but more like some derivatives that lead to potential human and societal harms, etc. Maybe what kind of governance recommendation, and that's a collaboration would be lovely. And for that, I would love to maybe petition for another meeting, and Panu can, help us coordinate that with the core team, where we can potentially brainstorm how do we kind of adopt this potential research and where it all plugs into privacy safety framework, what kind of decisions should be made at the regulatory levels, knowing what's happening. And then finally, you said something about the firmware level. I'm happy to, introduce you to some of the policy folks at Meta, or even the product team or the avatar team that needs to understand. And then basically they need to respond to us saying, hey, are you going to implement privacy preserving algorithms or not? And that yes or no is very important for us to know, because whatever they say in their privacy policy doesn't matter. Like, we need to know real implementation. So those are two things that I think are very, very critical to moving the needle in the right direction. And rest every recommendation that our advisors have made, I second that. Minus RARA, by the way, even though this is getting recorded, I'm not a huge fan of that organization. They're just interested in making a whole lot of membership. So
there's lots of exposure in the groups there, but yeah, that's a good point. Their focus is a little different than all of ours.
Exactly. They're just more like an industry. Let's bring a bunch of sponsor, make some money. So I caution that. But every other organization that has been mentioned is fantastic and would really appreciate your work.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sounds good. For sure. So shall I contact you, or you can send me the links? Or
Panu is going to coordinate. Yeah, our project manager on this project, Panu, he's going to coordinate with you the next meeting with the core team. Then let me get in contact with Meta's team, be like, hey, this research needs to be in front of your product team, because they have these design jam sessions and they invite us, but we'll go back to them and be like, hey, assemble a team that needs to actually know this. And then now we need an answer from you. What are you going to do? And then that would be a useful, moving the needle in the right direction.
For sure. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
I had another. I had another question for you. Are you aware of open source hardware that looks at VR experiences but includes brainwave data?
Oh, I heard there was a new release, I think maybe 3 months ago, of a VR device that has electroencephalogram technology. Quite interesting. I haven't looked into it precisely, but do you know, like, what are they using it for? Is it for checking the health of the person while they're playing, or is it also using it for fingerprinting or like other stuff?
I actually don't know. I don't know, but I think it would be interesting to see the experience that you made, the escape room experience you made. If you added brainwave data to that experience and you explored what inferences could be made by looking at brainwave data and the other biometrics that can be collected. I say this because I think it's understood that EEG data is limited in what it can tell us, but when you combine it with other data sets, really, really, really dangerous inferences can be made about someone's nervous system. And I think that what I'm hoping is this community here, who knows way more about privacy than I do and security than I do, can preempt the terrible things that could happen. Once you get into someone's nervous system and hacking their nervous system, it's like game over. So
I think there are many other follow-ups that we can do. So that could be one, create another user study where you're using VR and EEG I also was thinking about doing another one with augmented reality as well, like doing some user study in campus in Berkeley or something, and you can like walk around and you have different prompts and stuff. That would be also interesting. Another user study could be on, or like in general about advertisement in the metaverse. I think Luis calls it virtual product placement or something like that. That would be also interesting as well.
That Futurama episode where they get the eyes and the advertisements are popping up right in front of them all.
Yeah, stuff like that. Or like, you know, because the thing is in the metaverse, the advertisements will be immersive, right? You are gonna be inside the advertisement, so the Best Buy or whatever store they virtualize will not look the same. Like my Best Buy will be different to your Best Buy, right? So it's kind of crazy. So I think studies on that end as well. So if I stick to academia, I guess there is a lot of other stuff that I can do, and Vivek also could do it as well, even though VR and privacy is not his main topic. It's more mine, the privacy in itself and differential privacy. And if I go to the industry, I don't know, like if a job allows for this type of investigations. But I'm very happy to like talk with researchers and actually, if you know of any, get into this so that we can like discuss and so on.
Hey, sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
Oh, I was at an event recently where the folks from OpenBCI were talking about Galia, and I think that they have really good intentions. They're just not really focused on the privacy aspect of it. So, but I think that they're starting to think about that. And I feel like they would probably, I don't know, but I have a sense that they would probably welcome any advice you could give them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Just one last recommendation, just, you know, speaking to what Michelle just said, there is this person, I've met him at GDC, Alex Castillo, and Luis, I'm pointing this to you as well. Castillo has this startup called Neurosity, and he's developed this brain-computer non-invasive interface called Notion. He's already demonstrated that he can fly drones and all kinds of things using Notion, and his Notion, the crown, can be combined now with VR, and a whole long time ago with AR. So that's a very open sort of framework, and, you know, SDKs out there, you can join their Discord, etc. But just another angle, and it doesn't have to be you got to finish your PhD and all that stuff, but like you can actually, in your work is going to inspire so many people. So when you come across somebody looking to BCI stuff, Castillo's work could really be combined, and including OpenBCI Galia stuff, to demonstrate the real risks related to the very intersection of BCI and XR. That intersection is least bit studied from a privacy perspective so far, and this is a niche and a very unique opportunity that your research is a foundation for those type of, you know, opportunities.
Yeah.
One quick question. Do the offsets from MetaGuard mask gait? Meaning your physical motion, even if it might not know your height, does it mask your
so this is a very, I know you're looking for. This is very important and a very good question. So we have like discrete attributes. we have discrete attributes that we are gathering, right? Like height and wingspan, as you saw. But then what about like patterns, right? Like you could be moving your head in a way that is very unique to you, right? Or maybe you every time you talk, you raise your hand 3 times, and then you could actually study this and identify people with this type of behavior as well, right? So I think,
and one of the reasons I specifically mentioned gait is that there's a lot of studies out there you can find where just gait by itself can be used to identify age. It can be used to identify dementia, and it actually can be used to identify depression, which is shocking to me that that's possible. But there's studies that show
also identify an individual.
So yes, you could have a unique.
It's a biometric, right?
Your unique gait. Now I think your unique gait would be camera data, but even just the speed and rhythm of your gait can indicate your age, and I ask if that can MetaGuard mask that in some way.
So we haven't perform a gate attack. So my assumption is that MetaGuard will obfuscate it to some extent, but then I am for sure there will be other factors that MetaGuard is not hiding as well, like the cadency of your steps and how you move your hips and stuff like that, right? So I think it will obfuscate it to some extent, but there should be more studies trying to understand how to obfuscate this type of thing. I think maybe one variable, because we were talking about space protections, right? Like you can tweak these coordinates of your headset, your controllers on space, but what about time, right? And gate is a lot about timing. So perhaps we could find smart ways to delay the signals that you relay to servers so that the gate is also protected. So if I move my hip in certain way, then there's some randomness, some fuzziness there as well. So you cannot really tell.
That's a smart idea. If you can warp time the way you're warping space, then you can mask people's gait.
Exactly, and that's something that we have to think about how to do it. Yeah.
When who's doing the actual attacks? Are you because you're developers, right? And data scientists or such. So do you have security researchers you work with who try to attempt these attacks, or are you also attempting the attacks through your knowledge?
No, it was just us two. So we developed the game, and then we had them play, and then in the background we had these algorithms that were extracting all this data and inferring. But the attacks are, I mean, we are just two people, right? And they were not extremely sophisticated. For example, to learn someone's height, you just have to, for example, get the 99th percentile of the Y coordinate, and then of your headset, and then you can estimate the height like that, right? So they are not crazy attacks that we had to do, and that's also scary, right? Because just two people, and with things that are not too sophisticated, you can actually gather so much data. So imagine a company with thousands of employees, right? So that's.
Hey, so Deborah, I know earlier you mentioned, and it was being discussed, the gate data. I just want to clarify, because we're doing this very study at the augmented reality authentication protocol that we are developing for NIST, for public safety officers. So we've been like literally hashing out all these gate and all these other identifiable research methods and what is existing and what we want to devise further for public safety officers, given the circumstances. So gate actually currently, as if I know today, cannot uniquely identify a person, because we specifically investigated that. It can be done at a distance, and you have to have multiple cycles of gate cycle, and then apply some kind of machine learning algorithm. But the research does not exist today that it can uniquely identify an individual. And people have done like 57 or 100 or 150 sample size of data that is already known people, but you can't, and with certain cycles to uniquely identify them within a subset, but it is not really a way to authenticate in a large demographic, etc. So we
not today.
We looked at it from an authentication, protocol perspective. Like, hey, can we use gate for this? And so it's impossible today, as much as I know. But if it does happen, then that becomes really, really interesting, and that's an attack vector for everybody.
Sure. Well, no, that makes sense. I'm just pulling from my experience back when I was doing biometric authentication working at Visa. But I had done a lot of research on what was coming to market, what's still being worked on, whatnot. So it's good to know that gate still isn't quite there, but it might be in the future. So yeah, cool. Yeah. All right.
And to your point about the security research stuff, I mean, my brain starts looking at this when talking about unique identification, and we even use a lot of marketing data for this. But in the security field, when we have to come to like persona identification and using OSINT to actually identify who is the person doing a thing, we use the same tactics that are used in marketing to uniquely identify folks. And this seems to be one extra subset of data that we could dive into that would be really useful in that particular case. MetaGuard aside. That might be confounding to some of us on the security side, but we also see these things as benefits too.
Sure. I mean, security folks confound security folks all the time, right? Look at Tor. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, Tor makes security teams looking at cybercrime like go, but they're using Tor too. So like, it's just,
we're getting so used to it now.
yeah, it's an arms race, right?
Yeah, and there are ways to identify folks based on the exit nodes, but yeah, it's
exactly.
Hey, so fantastic discussion. Really appreciate you, Gonzalo's, and Vivek as well, and everyone else who was able to stick around, give some time, present some amazing findings and research thought process. Would really appreciate to bring you back with the core team and have some more discussion. Anybody from this group, we want to be part of that core team discussion specifically, please flag and let Bhanujit know, so we will invite you as well.
I think Bhanujit had a question before, though. I think Bhanujit had a question before.
Yeah, I had one question. So when you talk about privacy budget, so what are the factors which that contribute to the privacy budget, and on what factors does it depend? Can it deplete with sessions? And just wanted to know more about what contributes it, and is it in control of a user or not?
Yeah, this goes in hand with what I was discussing with, where I answered to Deborah. But so to explain it more easily, in a normal setting, when an individual is in this data set and you query the data set multiple times, every time with, let's say, a value of 1, then if you query this 5 times, then the budget of that person has, you've spent 5 units of that, right? This is in the central mode. We are in the local mode. So it's like every time you send data point to the server, you are spending budgets. So if today I use 1 unit, then it's 1. Then tomorrow I do it again, then it's 2, right? So the budget increases. So there is this thing that you have user level privacy and event level privacy. User level privacy protects the user itself, so the identity of the user. And event level privacy doesn't necessarily protect the user, but that gives plausible deniability to the event. So I know it's you, but I'm not sure if you did this, right? So what companies do today is assume that the days are independent. So if you are sharing data today, tomorrow it will be independent, and therefore the budget is reset every day, which I don't think it's completely realistic, because obviously you are the same person, it's 2 days from apart. In terms of MetaGuard, so we consider every session independent. So, which I think it's a better assumption than if you are sending your data to, for example, Apple or Google, because they know your IP, so they know they could know, that tomorrow you did it again. Not saying that they track your IP, of course. So if you are using some sort of IP obfuscation technique, then I would wager that the sessions in the metaverse are independent, and therefore you have to look into each of them independently, and therefore the budget wouldn't increase. But this is only my intuition, and I will have to discuss with other researchers as well. And what are the concerns of the privacy budget? And the best thing it would be to test it with a lot of data, right? And see if you can actually identify the same person across multiple sessions and with all the more people and so on, and empirically demonstrated.
Understood. Makes sense. Thank you. So
excellent. So if
that is
no
all.
other questions, then perhaps we can wrap up the session, and we'll bring you back, Gonzalo and hopefully Vivek, in a core team meeting. Thank you, everyone. It was so insightful, and hope to see you next Friday.
Yeah, and some words on my end. I just want to say thank you for all the attention that we received during this time. We have received very much, and it means a lot to us. Thank you.
Great work.
Thanks for all the great work. Really, this was wonderful research, and what you've brought to help protect humans is really, really wonderful. And I hope you get a lot of recognition for it.
Hopefully.
Hard work.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
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 Bye.